What's up guys, just Josh here. Welcome back to the most viewed series on this channel, album rankings. Today I'm finally bringing you guys my updated Trivium album ranking. I did two of them in the past, my initial one and then an updated one. So yeah, this is going to be the first album ranking I've ever updated a second time. And yeah, I meant to get this out in October when In the Court of the Dragon released. I was busy with school and shit, so that didn't happen. But I'm finally bringing it to you guys now. I definitely want to get back into making these videos for you guys. These are really fun. I've been thinking about some bands that I've been wanting to rank the albums of. Maybe Hatebreed, Suffocation, Dying Fetus. So yeah. Just a quick side note before we get into the ranking. Trivium is the hardest band for me to rank because all of their albums are great. I don't think they have a single bad album. These are ranked on A, my personal enjoyment of each album, and B, how much I come back to these albums and listen to them all the way through. So without any further ado, let's get into the ranking. And here we go, pissing people off right off the bat. My number 10 is What the Dead Men Say, Trivium's 9th album released in 2020. And again, I'm not saying this is a bad album. I like every Trivium album. I think every Trivium album is good. And some are great, some are just good. This one is the only one that's bordering on like meh territory for me. I never find myself coming back to this album to listen to it all the way through. I'll throw on the title track, I'll throw on Catastrophist, Amongst the Shadows and the Stones, The Defiant, Sickness Unto You, Bending the Arc to Fear. Other than that, I couldn't care less about this album, honestly. And I know this is a very unpopular opinion. This is some people's like top 5, top 3. This might even be some people's all-time #1 favorite Trivium album. But yeah, I just never find myself coming back to it. I think I've only listened to it all the way through like 2 or 3 times since it's came out. Bleed Into Me and Scattering the Ashes are just painfully boring songs in my opinion, and The Ones We Leave Behind is kind of just meh. It's kind of just there. I don't like it, I don't hate it, I'm just kind of indifferent on that track. But yeah, like I said, my favorite tracks on here are What the Dead Men Say, Catastrophist, Amongst the Shadows and the Stones, The Defiant, Sickness Unto You, and Bending the Arc to Fear. Other than that, I really don't care for this album too much. And again, I know it's a very unpopular opinion. I think the only other person that I've seen that would put this at number 10 would probably be Ryan Panny here on YouTube. He's a great YouTuber. Check him out. I'll leave his channel down in the description below. But yeah, number 10, What the Dead Men Say. And at number 9, we have Trivium's 7th album released in 2015, Silence in the Snow. Now, after Matt blew out his voice in 2014, he couldn't scream anymore, so they had to make do with what they had. So Matt only does cleans on this album. The closest you get to screaming is the verses of Dead and Gone, where Matt has some grit on his voice, but it really sounds very strained and painful for him. I think Corey could have done some screaming on this album because he does screams live, and he's done a couple miscellaneous backup screaming parts on the albums. Most notably in the new album, In the Court of the Dragon, he actually has quite a bit of parts where you can hear him screaming. But yeah, I think they could have had Corey screaming on this album a little bit, because I forget which song it's in, but there's this one like really heavy metalcore riff, and Matt's like singing over it, which really doesn't work too well. I would have liked to hear some screaming on this album. I think Corey could have done it. But yeah. And ironically, this was the album that they brought 7 strings on, or back on, because they hadn't used 7 strings at this point since Shogun. So it's kind of weird. They have like their most melodic album, but they bring back 7 strings on it. Which is fine, of course. I mean, there's some great guitar work on here, and Matt's clean vocals are really good on this album. Sort of operatic in some parts, but yeah. My favorite tracks on here are the title track, Blind Leading the Blind, Dead and Gone, Pull Me From the Void's good, Until the World Goes Cold, Rise Above the Tides, Breathe in the Flames. You know, there's 2 bonus tracks, Cease All Your Fire, Darkness of My Mind. Those are okay too. But yeah, this is a nice chill album. You can throw this on in the car with your parents that don't really like metal, and they won't completely hate it. So, if you want a more melodic, chill album, this is definitely a good album to listen to. And at number 8, we have Trivium's 8th album, released in 2017, The Sin and the Sentence. And I know this is another wildly unpopular ranking, but there's 3 songs on this album that I really can't get into, and that's why I have it so low. Other Worlds, Endless Night, and Beauty and the Sorrow. Now, they're not bad songs, but I think that Endless Night and Beauty and the Sorrow are really too soft for the album. They kind of throw off the listening experience in the second half for me. And Other Worlds is just boring, man. I always skip it. But otherwise, this is a really good album, and I think a good return to form for the band. This album is heavy. This album, especially tracks like The Wretchedness Inside and Betrayer, Sever the Hand, Thrown into the Fire, are just punishing tracks. And I think this album definitely helped bring back a lot of Trivium fans after Vengeance Falls and Silence in the Snow kind of soured people on them. Even some people didn't even like In Waves, but I love In Waves. We'll get into that later. But yeah, Sin and the Sentence, the title track, Beyond Oblivion are great. Heart From Your Hate's a bit more radio friendly, but I actually think that's a pretty decent song. Betrayer's a rager, Wretchedness Inside is a rager, Sever the Hand is awesome, The Revanchist is great, Thrown into the Fire is awesome. But yeah, I think they could have even put the re-recording of Pillars of Serpents on this album instead of the 3 aforementioned tracks, and it would have fit. Would have made the album a lot shorter, but I think it would have fit on here, even though it is a re-recording. But yeah, otherwise a really good album. It's just kind of soured a bit by those 3 tracks that I don't really like. And at number 7 we have The Crusade, Trivium's 3rd album, released in 2006. And this saw a major shift for the band after their first 2 albums, Ember to Inferno and Ascendancy, were more of a metalcore sound with heavy inspiration and elements from thrash and melodic death metal. They decided on The Crusade to go all in on the thrash metal influence and create a straight up thrash album. Now, there's some prog elements here and there, especially on the title track, The Crusade, but yeah. Ascendancy really broke the band into not necessarily into the mainstream, but they definitely gained a lot of popularity on Ascendancy, especially in Europe and other foreign countries like that. But once they released The Crusade, it seems like the press just turned their back on Trivium, and they were panned by a lot of people for it. A lot of bands gave them hard times on tour about it. And yeah, I really like this album, honestly. This was the first Trivium album I ever listened to, and I really loved the thrash influence on here. Most notably, like a Metallica type influence on this album, especially in the vocals. Matt primarily sings with a raspy type clean voice on here, which very much gives James Hetfield vibes, specifically from Justice and the Black Album. And yeah, you gotta remember, this was young Trivium. They were still trying to figure out their signature sound at this point, so you can't really blame them for wanting to make an album that delves into more classic metal, 80s thrash specifically. And there are some ill-advised 80s metal tropes on here, such as Anthem, We Are the Fire, and The Rising. They seem kind of corny nowadays, but I can let it slide. They're still pretty decent songs. But my favorite songs on here are Ignition, Detonation, Entrance of the Conflagration, Unrepentant, Sadness Will Sear, Becoming the Dragon, To the Rats, Tread the Floods, Contempt Breeds Contamination, and the aforementioned title track. And yeah, this album really doesn't get the credit that I think it deserves for paving the way for Shogun, which is a lot of people's favorite Trivium album. On Shogun, they combined The Crusade with the first 2 albums, kind of creating like a mix of thrash, metalcore, melodic death metal, and those 3 albums, those first 3 albums, really culminated and combined to make Shogun, and The Crusade had a really big part in that, because you can still hear the James Hetfield type inspired clean voice on Shogun. So there's definitely elements of The Crusade and the first 2 albums on Shogun, and I really don't think that The Crusade gets the credit that it deserves for paving the way for Shogun. So yeah, at number 7, The Crusade. And at number 6, we have Trivium's 6th album, released in 2013, Vengeance Falls. I know this is another unpopular pick. Not a lot of people like this album too much, but I actually really like this album. This was the album that I listened to the most from Trivium last year on Apple Music, which I really don't know how. Maybe all the times I listened to it while driving or something, but yeah, I really like this album, man. It's definitely a more melodic album, but there's still lots of heavy riffs on this album, and there's still a decent amount of screaming on this album as well. They went with David Draymond of Disturbed for producer on this album, and that kind of leads Matt's vocals to sound a bit Disturbed-like in some parts, specifically on To Believe. But I don't know, I still like this album. I think this album's a really, really solid album, and Matt's lyrics on here are actually pretty dark. Like, most of them delve into anxiety and depression on songs like Strife, Through Blood, Dirt, and Bone, Incineration, The Broken World, Wake the End Is Nigh, and the bonus track As I Am Exploding. And I really relate to a lot of the lyrics on this album. And yeah, I think this album definitely is way overhated. It's not their best album by any means, but I think a lot of people give this album shit, and unjustifiably so. I think this is a really good album. But yeah, my favorite tracks are Brave the Storm, Vengeance Falls, Strife, No Way to Heal, At the End of This War, Through Blood, Dirt, and Bone, Incineration, The Broken World, and Wake the End Is Nigh. And the two bonus tracks, No Hope for the Human Race and As I Am Exploding, are really good as well. And at number 5, we have Trivium's 5th album, 2011's In Waves. Now this is a really, really diverse album. You get songs that are more melodic on here, such as Watch the World Burn, Black, Built to Fall, and Of All These Yesterdays. And then you get really, really heavy songs, blistering even songs, such as Dusk Dismantled and Chaos Reigns, both of which are just screaming. There's no singing in those two songs. I think A Skyline's Severance is just screaming as well. I could be wrong though. And yeah, then you get mixes of both sounds, such as Inception of the End, the title track, Caustic Are the Ties That Bind, Forsake Not the Dream. And then this album has an outro called Leaving This World Behind, which is really, really cool. It's kind of got a black metal vibe to it, actually. And then I love how the bonus tracks on this album are actually like interspersed into the actual album, which is really cool. I don't think I've ever seen a band do that. Most bands just shove all their bonus tracks to the end of the album, but no, on this album they weave in the bonus tracks to the actual album order, which I think is really cool, and I actually listened to this album with the bonus tracks. So yeah, this album is really awesome, very diverse, like I said, and I think that really makes this a very strong album. And at number 4, we have Trivium's 10th and most recent album, released in 2021, In the Court of the Dragon. This album is just an absolute masterpiece, for sure their best album since Shogun, and I'm not saying that to undermine any of their other releases since Shogun. I just think that this is their strongest album since Shogun. And speaking of Shogun, the Phalanx, the last track on here, was written for Shogun originally. They ended up taking out the bridge of this song and using it for Torn Between Scylla and Charybdis from Shogun, and ended up not finishing the Phalanx. A similar thing also happened with Silence in the Snow. It was originally written for Shogun, but they scrapped it and later revived it. Anyways, this album, dude, there's lots of fucking amazing riffs on this album. Furious drum work from Alex Bent. Alex Bent is just a madman, dude. For sure, one of the best modern metal drummers out there. The guy is just insane. And Matt's vocals on here are really powerful as well. He's got the nice, epic, clean vocals in the choruses of In the Court of the Dragon, Like a Sword Over Damocles, Shadow of the Abattoir, the Phalanx as well. And yeah, I like how Paolo and Corey get to shine through on vocals a little bit here. You hear Corey doing some screaming on Shadow of the Abattoir and From Dawn to Decadence, and then Paolo gets to shine through on the chorus of Like a Sword Over Damocles, and the chorus of the Phalanx, you can hear him harmonizing with Matt as well. Just amazing, man. Front to back, everybody plays their ass off on this album. This album is just incredible. I can't say any more good things about this album than I already have. It's just incredible, man. Every song on this album is great, but my top favorites are In the Court of the Dragon, Like a Sword Over Damocles, A Crisis of Revelation, Shadow of the Abattoir, Fall Into Your Hands, and The Phalanx. Now, Feast of Fire, No Way Back, Just Through, and From Dawn to Decadence are slightly weaker than the rest of the songs, in my opinion. Feast of Fire is more of a radio-friendly song, and it kind of feels a bit odd in this track list, but it's still a good song. No Way Back, Just Through kind of has... The chorus is a bit filler. I think they could have tried a bit harder on that chorus. But again, it's still a great song, and From Dawn to Decadence is also a great song as well. It's just slightly weaker compared to the rest of the album. But yeah, man, front to back, this album is just great, man. I can't say any more good things about it, so let's move on. And at number 3, we have Trivium's debut album released in 2003, Ember to Inferno. Now, I feel like this album is criminally underrated. I don't see too many people that have this album in the discussion of favorite Trivium albums, but I really love this album. This is just a fiery debut from this band. It's the sound of a young band that's just hungry and ready to take over the world. And yeah, man, this album has so many fucking awesome riffs, just jam-packed with furious riffs, especially on If I Could Collapse the Masses, Fuse or Fugue or Revelation, I never knew how to say that song, Requiem, title track, To Burn the Eye, Falling to Gray, When All Light Dies, just jam-packed with awesome riffs. And Matt's screaming on this album is a bit underdeveloped in some parts, and his cleans are really good on this album, but yeah, I don't mind, man. This is a debut album, so those parts are a bit forgivable. But yeah, man, this is just an incredible album and a really, really strong debut for Trivium, honestly. And my favorite tracks on here are Pillars of Serpents, If I Could Collapse the Masses, Fuse, however you say it, A Revelation, Requiem, title track, To Burn the Eye, Fall into Gray, My Hatred, When All Light Dies. I mean, every song on this album is great, okay? There's not a bad song on this album. This is just an incredible debut for Trivium. And at number 2, we have Trivium's second album released in 2005, Ascendancy. This is just a top-shelf metalcore album for sure, with strong elements of thrash and melodic death metal, just like their debut album. And yeah, there's a lot of great riffs on this album. Lots of great vocals from Matt, some good lyrics as well. And this is just a very exciting album, a very energetic listen. And like I said, one of the top shelf metalcore albums for sure. My favorite tracks on here are Rain, Pull Harder on the Strings of Your Martyr, Drowned and Torn Asunder, Ascendancy, Gunshot of Trepidation, Like Light to the Flies, Suffocating Sight, Departure, and Declaration. And the 2 songs I didn't mention, Dying in Your Arms and Deceived, they're good too, just not my top favorites from this album. And then the 2 bonus tracks, Blinding Tears Will Break the Skies and Washing Away Me and the Tides, are really good as well. Just an incredible album, and this album really helped give Trivium a lot of success in their early days. This was their debut album on Roadrunner, and they're still with Roadrunner to this day, which is pretty rare for a band to stay on one label for their whole career. Other bands that come to mind for that are Whitechapel. Ever since their second album, they've always been on Metal Blade, and Slipknot. Ever since their major label debut, they've always been on Roadrunner. So bands have definitely done it. It's just kind of rare. But yeah, man, Ascendancy, really, really good album, and my second favorite. And it was actually my first favorite in the original video, but not anymore. Let's get into that. And at number 1, we have Trivium's 4th album released in 2008, Shogun. My god, man, this album is just an incredible fucking masterpiece, front to back. Not a single song on here is weak. They're all just amazing. I love the longer songs on here. I love the more poetic song titles. And the title track, Shogun, is their best song in my opinion. It is just a 12-minute absolute behemoth of a song, just a sprawling masterpiece of a song, and it feels like 6 minutes because you're into every single second of it. It's got that nice clean bridge, then it just comes back with the furious, I would call it melodic death metal pretty much part after the clean bridge, and it's just a fucking incredible song, and this album is incredible front to back. I'll just go through the track list. Kirstek Omen, Torn Between Scylla and Charybdis, Down from the Sky, Into the Mouth of Hell We March, Throes of Perdition, Insurrection, The Calamity, He Who Spawned the Furies of Prometheus and the Crucifix, Like Callisto to a Star in Heaven, or Big Nut, if you know, you know, and Shogun, the title track. And the bonus tracks Poison the Knife or the Noose and Upon the Shores are great too. There's also a cover of Iron Maiden on here, but I don't really care about covers, so I haven't really heard it. But yeah, man, like I said, not a single bad song on this album. And I love how this album combines their first 3 albums into one massive masterpiece of an album. It was able to unseat Ascendancy for my number 1 because I find myself coming back to this album a bit more than Ascendancy. I listen to it a bit more often than Ascendancy, so that's why it's my number 1 now. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Let me know what your Trivium ranking is down in the comments below, and hopefully I don't get destroyed too much for having Sin in the Sentence and What the Dead Men Say a bit lower on the list. But like I said, man, every Trivium album is great. This is the hardest band for me to rank because I love all of their albums, but some of them I love a bit more than others. But yeah, I want to get back to doing these videos for you guys. I know I always say it, but yeah, these videos are really fun to do. And yeah, I want to do a Dying Fetus ranking at some point, a Cannibal Corpse ranking, Suffocation ranking, Hatebreed ranking. I got a lot of bands I want to rank, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, guys, like I said, let me know what your ranking is down in the comments below. Thanks for watching as always, and peace out.